The murmur started in a wave barely audible at first. It rose slowly, like the buzz of flies around something forgotten. A giggle, a snort. Then the pointed chuckle of someone too young to know better. Inside the glass-walled entrance of Fort Ashford's Military ID Processing Center, the air was thick with impatience. Recruits clutched folders, parents filled out forms, and a handful of junior officers stood around like statues. Draped in polished uniform perfection near the back, slouched on a hard plastic chair, sat a woman no one knew. Her coat caught the light, awkwardly sunlight sliding off a patchy, wrinkled surface that might have once been green. The fabric was threadbare in places. A zipper dangled halfway down, broken. The collar slumped in exhaustion, and stitched high on the right arm, just above a tear, held together with dark thread, was a patch most had never seen before. Rusted orange edges, a lightning bolt spearing. Through a broken shield and 3 cryptic letters, RSD, she didn't move, didn't look up, just sat there like she was waiting for something time had forgotten to deliver. 2 teenage recruits, crisp in their first-issue uniforms and overflowing with youthful pride, elbowed each other. Since Nam one muttered, "Yeah, or maybe it was World War I," the other smirked. "Hope she doesn't think she's getting on base like that." Their laughter was not cruel, exactly more the awkward ridicule of boys, too proud to admit they were scared, too green to recognize dignity in disguise. But not everyone was amused. Near the front of the room, just exiting a side corridor, a man in full-dress uniform froze mid-step. General Marcus Galloway was not known for hesitation. A man whose voice had once called in airstrikes through enemy fire, who'd seen enough to stop flinching long ago, stood still now, as if someone had pressed pause on the world. His eyes had locked on the jacket, or rather the patch. You could hear the squeak of boots, the click of a pen cap, the hum of a vending machine struggling in the corner. And then he walked, not rushed, not dramatic, just firm, measured steps. Each one pulled by recognition, reverence, something. Deep and buried in the marrow of memory, the boys turned when they saw him coming. Their laughter died instantly. The general's boots stopped right in front of her. "Where did you get that patch?" His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like shrapnel. The woman, who until now had been no more than background, lifted her head slowly. Her face was lined but not worn, her eyes pale like gray glass clouded by time. She didn't answer immediately, just studied the man in front of her with a calm that made the recruits uneasy. He leaned forward, just slightly. "RSD," he whispered. "Rescue and Shadow Division. That's not a patch civilians wear." She blinked once. "I didn't buy it," she said. Her voice was low, firm. "I earned it." A ripple moved through the room. A young officer by the desk dropped his pen. "You were with RSD?" Galloway asked again, but this time the question felt rhetorical. She gave the faintest nod. Before it was disbanded, he stepped back, not out of shock but out of respect. His face softened. The lines near his mouth slackened. Slowly, he turned to the recruits. "Everyone out," he said. They hesitated. "I said out." No one argued. No one asked why. Chairs scraped back. Doors opened. And in under 30 seconds, the entire waiting room was empty except for the woman and the general. He sat beside her like a man sitting beside a gravestone he never thought he'd see again. They told us the RSD unit never made it back," he said, voice gentler now, "that the operation in Algeria was compromised. No survivors." She nodded. That was the official story. His hand trembled just slightly as he reached up and touched the patch on her sleeve, not enough to touch skin, only fabric. "And I was captured. Spent 11 months in a cellar beneath a textile mill outside Oran. When they traded prisoners in '83, I came back. But your name," he trailed off. "They erased it. National security, clean operation, no evidence. The patch was all I kept." That and silence. The room felt like it belonged in a church. Sacred, still. "Why didn't you ever Didn't you come forward?" he asked. "I tried," she said, 3 times. They smiled, nodded, took notes, then told me I was confused, that no such unit existed. That maybe I had served in administration. He closed his eyes. "You were RSD." "I am RSD," she corrected gently. Galloway stood, not quickly, but with purpose. Then he snapped to attention and raised his hand in the crispest salute of his career, not to rank, not to position, but to legacy. To a soldier buried by politics but raised by truth, she did not return the salute. She just looked at him and smiled, small, knowing, like someone who had carried fire through darkness and didn't need to prove the burns. That evening, something changed on base. Quietly, and without fanfare, a file was reclassified. A photograph was found. And the next morning, in the hallway where new recruits passed each day, a portrait was hung. The plaque beneath it read, Captain Marla Jensen, RSD Operation Veilfire Service, without acknowledgement. Strength without applause. And in the corner of the frame, stitched into her jacket, was the same patch the world had forgotten till one man, one moment, and one memory brought it roaring back to life. It was raining the next Saturday, not the kind of storm that lashes sideways or roars through gutters, but a steady, gentle drizzle, the sort that made everything feel quiet. Still, at 9:42 a.m., the base shuttle bus wheezed to a stop just outside Fort Ashford's main gate. The doors hissed open, and from the second row, she stepped down. The same woman, the same coat, it clung to her shoulders, a little heavier from the damp, yet somehow seemed more regal now, more seen. But something was different as she walked toward the ID Center entrance. Boots shuffled quickly into formation. A line of recruits, maybe 20, maybe more, stood outside in dress uniform, caps low, spines straight. At their center stood the two boys from last week, Denton and Moralsno. Longer laughing, no longer smug. Denton clutched a small bouquet of white lilies in one hand and a tightly folded American flag in the other. His jaw twitched, his fingers trembled, just enough to betray the storm inside. No one spoke. The woman stopped before them. For a breathless moment, all that could be heard was the soft patter of rain against fabric and asphalt. Then Denton stepped forward, eyes fixed on the ground, voice unsteady. "We didn't know," he said. "We were ignorant. We mocked what we didn't understand." He extended the bouquet with both hands, like an offering to something sacred. "Sorry, ma'am." She looked at him, not with judgment, but with a gaze that saw deeper than youth, deeper than pride. She accepted the flowers wordlessly. Behind the recruits, mounted on the glass wall of the center, was a new installation, a photograph from decades ago. Grainy but proud, a young woman in combat fatigues crouched beside a crumbling building, eyes like steel, hair tucked back. Below it, the plaque bore her name, her operation, and 5 words that struck harder than any metal. "She served. We forgot. Never again." Inside, General Galloway stood at attention. "Captain Jensen," he said as she entered, addressing her not with sentiment but with full military protocol. She gave a tired smile. "You don't have to do that, Marcus." "I do," he replied, "because too many didn't." That morning, she wasn't just a ghost in the room anymore. She was a presence, a reckoning. Word spread fast across the base. The quiet woman in the old coat was no longer invisible. Commanders reviewed dusty archives. Names long buried came back in whispers. "RSD," they said in low voices, half in awe, half in disbelief. The Rescue and Shadow Division, rumored, redacted, erased, was real, and one of its own had been walking their hallways for years. Unseen by the afternoon, a request came from the base museum director. They wanted to display her jacket, her story, her patch. "Only if the story is told in full," she said. "No edits, no filters, no comfort." The next week, she returned again, this time to the training grounds. A special class had been organized closed door, hand-selected recruits, intelligence-track cadets. The room smelled of chalk and linoleum. At the front stood Captain Jensen, the coat draped over the back of her chair like a flag. She didn't start with her story, she started with theirs. "You think strength is loud," she told them. "You think courage looks like noise. But let me tell you something." Her voice was soft, but it settled over the room like gravity. "The bravest things I ever did did in silence. And the loudest screams I ever made never came from my mouth. They came from my choices. They listened. No one checked a phone, no one slouched." She described infiltration routes through abandoned Sewers in Tripoli, how she learned to mimic accents well enough to pass border checkpoints with nothing but a forged signature and a gut feeling. She described hunger, solitude, betrayal, the mission that cost 3 lives and saved 6. The moment she chose not to kill a child holding a grenade because her instinct said he was scared not committed, then she paused, took a breath. I was forgotten, she said. But I never stopped being a soldier, and I never stopped wearing this, she said, holding up the jacket. Because it's not just cloth, it's proof that I was here, that I mattered. One hand went up in the back. A young woman with close-cropped hair and wide eyes. What does RSD really mean? She asked. Jensen smiled faintly. Officially, she said, Rescue and Shadow Division. Then she leaned in, as if sharing a classified secret. Unofficially, it meant you went where no one else would, did what no one else could, and came back. Even when no one expected you to. There was silence. But it wasn't empty. It was sacred. When the class ended, she stood to leave. But this time, half the room stood with her not in dismissal. But in respect, the next day her name appeared in the Pentagon records, restored by executive order. The jacket, however, remained on her shoulders. At least for now, she was scheduled to speak at the Armed Forces Day commemoration next month, not because she asked, but because she had been asked. The list of speakers read like a roster of modern heroism, Medal of Honor recipients, wounded veterans, intelligence legends, and in bold at the bottom, Captain Marla Jensen, RSD Ret, voice of the forgotten. She wasn't sure if she'd go. Not because of fear, but because some stories still hurt to breathe. Even after decades. Even after apologies that night. In her modest apartment, not far from the base, she sat at her kitchen table. A tea bag, steeped in silence, beside her. The coat lay across the back of her chair, the patch catching moonlight through the window. She reached for a letter. It was unopened. The envelope yellowed, the ink faded, dated 1984. The return address blacked out with thick government tape. She opened it for the first time. Inside, 2 things, a single typed line and a photo. The line read, "We couldn't save Ubuchu. Saved us." The photo showed her team, 6 men and 1 woman, standing in front of a helicopter with no insignia, all smiling, all alive. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, reverent, human. She placed the photo on the fridge beside it, the patch stitched on a piece of the same jacket she wore, now cut and preserved like a badge of honor, and beneath it she scribbled 1 more line. A promise, I will not let them be forgotten again. The ceremony was held beneath a sky that couldn't decide between sun and shadow. Flags moved slowly in the breeze, quiet, almost solemn. A crowd had gathered on the parade field of Fort Ashford, where steel bleachers now lined the edges, and a polished podium stood at the center, flanked by uniformed honor guards. Families of soldiers, cadets, veterans, and dignitaries waited in reverent silence. Captain Marla Jensen stood behind the curtain of the stage, the same jacket on her shoulders. The seams had been reinforced, the collar restitched, but the patch remained untouched, faded, frayed, real. General Galloway approached from her left. "You don't have to do this," he said gently. "It's enough that you're here." "No," she replied. "They need to hear it from someone who lived the silence." He nodded once, not as a commanding officer, but as someone who knew what silence could cost. When her name was called, she stepped out slowly. The applause began soft and certain, almost shy. But as more faces recognized the woman who had become more than a whisper, it grew louder, then louder still, until even the trees seemed to stand taller. She took the podium, and for a moment just stood there, letting the moment settle. "I wasn't supposed to come back," she began. Her voice was stronger than it had been in years. "But I did, and when I returned, they told me to disappear. I tried, I really did." The crowd leaned in. "I became good at fading into the background, at being mistaken for the past, and that jacket, this jacket, was all I had left of the truth." She held the edge of the sleeve, fingers brushing the old threads like they were glass. "For decades, I believed silence was safer. But silence doesn't protect the truth, it buries it. And what's buried doesn't rest, it waits." Her eyes swept the rows of young soldiers seated before her. "See combat? Some of you will But every one of you will face a moment when you have to choose what kind of story you'll carry. One told loudly, or one held quietly if the world is ready to listen. A long pause followed, the kind that holds weight. Then she spoke of her team, of the 7 names never etched into any official memorial. She spoke of Alan, the medic, who wrote poetry inside his helmet. Of Franco, the pilot, who could land in the dark by instinct alone. Of Tamsin, who taught her how to disarm a man twice her size and still smile afterward. And of herself, sent behind enemy lines, not because she was expendable, but because she was invisible. I wasn't forgotten by accident, she said. I was forgotten by design. There were tears now, not just hers. She looked toward the commanding ranks in the front row. You have the power to write better endings than the ones we lived. Use it. When she stepped back, the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with breath, held too long, hearts heavy with reflection. Then the entire front row stood not by instruction, not in order, but in honor. It spread like a wave across, bleachers across ranks, across generations, until everyone was on their feet. The applause didn't sound like celebration, it sounded like acknowledgement. Later, in the museum gallery newly dedicated to unsung units of valor, her jacket was mounted behind glass, preserved just as it had been. Below it, a digital display played fragments of recovered RSD black and white frames of soldiers moving through dust storms and broken alleys. And at the center, always, was the faltering shape of a woman leading the way. Visitors paused longer at her section than any other, and across the hallway, just beyond the reflection of the display case, sat a small bench with a brass plate that read, "If you laughed, learn. If you served, remember. If you see someone forgotten, look closer." Weeks passed. The story spread beyond the base. Veterans groups picked it up, then newspapers, then networks. For the first time, the name RSD appeared on the evening news, accompanied not by speculation or secrecy, but reverence. Letters began arriving. From families who never knew how their loved ones died. From old comrades who'd thought they were the last. From strangers who'd seen her story and simply wrote, "Thank you." Each one she read. Each one she answered in time. Captain Jensen began hosting weekly sessions at the base's Heritage Center. Not speeches, just quiet gatherings. No cameras, no press, just truth. People came to talk. Sometimes they brought old patches, medals, worn boots. Sometimes they just brought silence, hoping she'd understand. She always did. One day, a young soldier sat across from her, fresh out of training. Nervous, he pulled something from his Paquita-folded paper, a crayon drawing. "My sister made this for me before I shipped out," he said. It was a child's scribble, a stick figure in a big green jacket. Underneath, a few shaky letters for the lady who never stopped being a hero. She held it to her chest and smiled. Not for cameras, not for ceremony, but because, after all the years, someone saw her. As a ghost, not as a footnote, but as something worth drawing. And on the day, she finally let the jacket go, placing it inside the museum with her own hands. She whispered something beneath her breath, not a goodbye, but a promise. They won't forget. If this story stirred something in your chest, don't let it stop here. Share it. Tell someone. Let quiet courage echo through time. Subscribe to Hidden Sparks if you believe the world needs more than noise. It needs memory, honor, and the strength to see what's hidden in plain sight.